Hello, this is Carl Snyder of Faith and FDH, and I'm shooting this video again at Leech Lake, and behind me we have a boat ramp that leads to the river, which is downstream of Leech Lake in beautiful Minnesota. And so if this was the winter, I would probably be here with my duck hunting boat and be putting it onto the river here and looking for ducks. And so this is a beautiful place, and we thank God for its majesty and beauty. This video is going to be entitled Evidence for the Resurrection of Jesus, and I'm going to take a little more time with this one than some of the others because this subject is so crucial. So many of the others are evidence for God, but don't get us to believing in Christianity and in Jesus Christ. But if Jesus Christ in fact lived, came to earth as a human being, as being God, and if he lived and died and resurrected, then Christianity is true. And so we get from the belief in God all the way to believing in Christianity. So I'm going to take a little more time with this subject, and I just encourage you to watch the video links that I post on this video. They're just fantastic, and I may even reference a book, but at least the videos are very, very good, and I just encourage you to watch them. Okay, so this is about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The truth of Christianity rests mostly on the resurrection. In one of Paul the Apostle's letters, he said that if Christ didn't rise from the dead, then the whole thing is not true and it's not worth believing. And so this is a very, very crucial point. Previously, in years past, there was a group of scholars that insisted that the New Testament was written in the 2nd century, and that the stuff about Christ being God and about his resurrection, all that stuff was just added later. And there was still good evidence, actually, that it was written in the 1st century by apostles and close associates to apostles, but there was a group that believed it was the 2nd century. Why were they so skeptical? Well, a large part of that is that they just believed that the dead are not raised. Never are the dead raised. It has never, ever happened, could not happen, will not happen. And so therefore, whatever evidence they looked at which seemed to back up the resurrection, they just automatically assumed, well, dead can't rise, so that evidence can't be right. And that is the assumption of naturalism, that everything has to be natural. Now, as a Christian scientist, I believe that most of the time, when we do experiments and things, we are looking for natural causes, and that's good and right and true. But to say that is somehow evidence against Christianity is not true. For as a Christian, I believe that God works in all ways, both natural and supernatural, and that most of the time he's acting from naturalistic causes. But there are times in history when God does perform supernatural acts in order to further his kingdom. And the beginning of the church, the genesis of the church, was certainly one of those times. And so the signs and miracles that Jesus did, and the miracles that the apostles did right after Jesus went to heaven, those are and the resurrection of Jesus, the purpose of those was that so that the fledgling church could get going. I mean, the church went from just the 12 apostles and a few believers to maybe 10,000 in a few months. And all these signs and miracles and the resurrection of Jesus and all the eyewitnesses to the resurrection was the reason why so many people believed. At one point, even in Acts, it points out the fact that many of the priests became Christians. And that's something that hadn't happened even when Jesus was alive. But as a result of the signs and miracles done by the apostles, and as a result of the power that they presented and their eyewitness testimony and their convincing that the Old Testament prophecies had been fulfilled in Jesus, those things were used as evidence for the chief priests and the priests in general to become believers in Jesus Christ. So what I would like to do is to ask you to suspend your as in all these, to suspend your assumption of naturalism. More and more historical evidence has surfaced among the historical scholars, and so that now they actually believe things historically that they did not believe before. For instance, they believe that Jesus did exist. They believe that miracles were attributed to him. They believe that he was crucified. They believe that the early church taught the resurrection. And not just like the 2nd century or late 1st century. The early church, historical evidence indicates that the early church taught, and the apostles taught, it was the main focus of their belief that Christ was God and that he raised from the dead. All the way back to within a few weeks or months of the death of Jesus. And so the question is, if this was happening, and because of that, thousands of people were being saved, even priests were being saved, even priests were believing in Jesus, who had crucified him and who had opposed him, many of them began to believe. Many did not, but many did. And so, in fact, if you read the entire text of the New Testament, the Gospels, and the book of Acts, which the book of Acts is actually a record of the early church and what the people did and what they believed and how the events transpired. If you read those, if you take away the resurrection of Jesus, it all falls flat on its face. Yet these books were written in the 1st century. They were written while there were many eyewitnesses to the resurrection still there. These are the events. And when the apostles were opposed by the Jewish leaders, they were put in prison, they were beaten and flogged, and they were threatened with death. What did they do? They said, "What can we do? Obey God or man?" And in fact, one text in the book of Acts says after they were beaten and flogged, they went away rejoicing that they had been worthy to be beaten for Jesus' sake. These were people that believed. And why did they believe? They were eyewitnesses to the risen Christ. And so as you go along through that 1st century, you find that the church spread because of the persecution. The church spread throughout the area, all the way to Greece and Rome and Turkey and those areas, Syria, Cyprus, and all those areas. In fact, Thomas even went to India and started a church there. But as we go through that time, we find that the Christians, although they had no political agenda, they didn't have an army, they didn't act as terrorists, they just simply believed in Jesus. They taught others to believe in Jesus, and they were respectful of the Roman government, but they did not accept the fact that Caesar was God. And so they continued to be persecuted, and they were crucified, yet they continued to grow until finally in the 4th century, the Emperor Constantine actually declared that Christianity was the official religion of Rome. Now, do I think that was a good thing? No, I don't think that was a good thing. But the point is that from humble beginnings, it grew to that point. In fact, even when the Roman government was overthrown by the Europeans, barbarians, the church took over leadership of Rome, and they actually governed Rome for centuries. And that just shows that how powerful this teaching of the resurrection and the teaching of the new life in Jesus Christ, how powerful that was. Now, if you look at the religion of Islam, you find, how did it grow and spread? It spread like crazy too, but how? It spread by the sword. Muhammad was a warrior, and he conquered neighboring countries, and his followers conquered neighboring countries until it spread all over into Asia and Europe. And so that's how Islam was spread. So you have a totally different kind of religion, one that's based on loving your enemies and non-conquest, to one that was one just of total conquest. And so I hope this has an impact on you in terms of your belief. It's all based upon, first of all, not assuming that God can never do a miracle, a supernatural miracle. First of all, you have to put down that assumption. Second of all, then you have to look at the historic evidence of the first century and see what that evidence is. And thirdly, you have to look at the church and its reaction and how it spread and how it has survived. Those three aspects should be enough to provide an awful lot of evidence that Christianity is true and that God does exist. And one point that I have not raised, and that is all of the prophecies in the Old Testament that were fulfilled by Jesus, just one after another after another. And so the prophets and David and clear back into the Old Testament, they talked about a coming Messiah. And those prophecies have all been fulfilled by Jesus Christ. So hundreds of years before, God showed the prophets of Israel about his coming son. And so I just close with that, and I just thank you for your attention and hope that you will communicate with me. And I hope that you will pray to God and say, "Dear God, if you exist, show me the truth of your existence and your love for me." And he will. All right, thank you.